Om Namah Shri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukhaswarupaya Swamine Tapaharine. Namaste everyone. In this series of videos, we'll be looking at some of Swami Vivekananda's very insightful and inspiring letters. So we started with one letter earlier. Today we will look at another letter. This was written to Srimati Sarala Ghoshal. She was the editor of a magazine called Bharati. In that magazine, she had covered some of Swami Vivekananda's work and appreciated it greatly. And Swamiji had a copy of it. Then he replies to that as follows. In this particular letter, we get some insight into Swami Vivekananda's judgment of India and what he thought was as a path of deliverance, especially the creating of a great workforce among the Indians themselves, and also with the help of the Western people who can come and inspire us and give us their wonderful insights. So he wanted that mixture. So we get to see all that, and also we get to know the nature of Indian people, especially in those days. So what Swamiji thought about it. So here we understand what's actually meant by love. So how to love one's country, especially when we want to love someone. If everything is good about that person or that particular place, we will definitely love it. But to love a country despite all its drawbacks, which somewhere kind of summarizes very beautifully. So that is real love. We will see what somebody says. So this letter was written from Darjeeling on 6th of April 1897. Swamiji says, Honored Madam, I feel much obliged for the Bharati sent by you and consider myself fortunate that the cause to which my humble life has been dedicated has been able to win the approbation of highly talented ladies like you. In this battle of life, men are rare who encourage the initiator of new thought, not to speak of women who would offer him encouragement, particularly in our unfortunate land. It is therefore that the approbation of an educated Bengali lady is more valuable than the loud applause of all the men of India. So basically, Swamiji relates to that article she has written to start with, and he says like he feels fortunate that a lady, an educated lady, especially in those days, Indian women were mostly suppressed and mostly confined to the domestic course, and that so much of oppression was going on those days, and the majority of the women were not educated. And Swamiji could see this, and he says that the approbation received from a Bengali educated Bengali lady like Sarla Ghoshal means a lot to him. And basically, she recognized his work and she's complimented him, and Swamiji is replying for this. And then he says, May the Lord grant that many women like you be born in this country and devote their lives to the betterment of their motherland. Here we see Swami Vivekananda's stress on women becoming torch-bearers of India's progress. So he says many great women like Sharla Ghoshal herself be born in this country and devote themselves to the betterment of our country. And then he says, I have something to say in regard to the article you have written about me in the Bharati. It is this. It has been for the good of India that religious preaching in the West has been and will be done. So Swamiji's firm conviction was that India was the land of spirituality, and every nation in this world has a role to play as some speciality of its own. And India's speciality has been religion and spirituality. And other countries have military strength, the political power, all that. But for India, it was spirituality. And Swamiji always felt that we should give our spirituality to the world and take from the world what it has. Every nation will not have everything. So in this creation, every nation has been given certain role, and somebody felt that one of the reasons for India's backwardness was India not going out to preach what she had, that great spiritual ideas which we find in the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita and all our scriptures, those were to be broadcasted to the world, which were not done. And Swamiji felt that that was one of the reasons, one of the primary reasons why we were ruled by so many people, all the foreign invaders. And that was the thing that he sort of, if we look at his lectures and his writings, we'll find that he wanted more and more Indians to equip themselves with knowledge of dharma, that is the spirituality, the religion, and give it to the world. And that's a very important thing that the world requires from us, and that is something that India can do very well, and that's something the world requires. And even today, we will see people like Sadhguru, then Swami Sarvapriyanandji, and when people talk of India, they mostly talk about the rishis, they talk about this Upanishads, they talk about meditation, they talk about yoga, because India is primarily known for this. We were never known to be, great military power, though we had military power, but it was not something for conquest, but it was spiritual thought that distinguished us as a nation. And Swami says, it is for the good of India. The religious preaching in the West has been and will be done. So in the past also it was so, and in the future also it will be so. And then he says, it has ever been my conviction that we shall not be able to rise unless the Western people come to our help. So Swamiji wanted that interchange between the Eastern philosophy and the Western civilization, especially the modern science. So he wanted that to come to us. And he says, in this country, no appreciation of merit can yet be found. We see this. No financial strength. And what is most lamentable of all, there is not a bit of practicality. Talking about 1890s. Then Swamiji says, there are many things to be done, but means are wanting in this country. We have brains but no hands. So we have to do many things, but the means to do them is lacking. We have the brains, but we are no workers. Then he says, this is a wonderful thing he says here. We have the doctrine of Vedanta. The highest philosophy the human mind ever conceived is the philosophy of the Vedanta. Then he says, but we have not the power to reduce it into practice. We have the philosophy of the Vedanta, greatest thought human mind ever conceived, but we are unable to reduce it into practice. Then, in our books, there is the doctrine of universal equality. Everybody is one. Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma. We talk of all this. Then, but in work, we make great distinctions. So, especially in those days when casteism was very rampant, and even today, we still make the distinction between people. But here, in this land, in our books, there was the doctrine of universal equality. That's something that Swami Vivekananda lived and practiced. But of course, the society didn't do that. Then he says, it was in India that unselfish and disinterested work of the most exalted type was preached. But in practice, we are awfully cruel, awfully heartless, unable to think of anything besides our own mass of flesh bodies. So if you look at the yogas, especially if you read Swami Vivekananda's Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Raja Yoga, and Jnana Yoga, there is one central idea, and that is unselfishness. If there is some ideal which is preached by all the yoga, which is common to all the yogas, that is the ideal of unselfishness. And even if we go back to the history, whatever the religion has preached is one of unselfishness. That's how we rise. We have preached it, all the yogas have preached it, that is the unselfishness as the ideal, but in practice we are awfully cruel, awfully heartless, and then we don't think of anything besides our own, these bodies. Then Swamiji says, yet it is only through the present state of things that it is possible to proceed to work. It's one of the most practical things. Swamiji was a very practical man. Whenever we want to do something, we are trying to jump out of ourselves, as it were. No, that is never going to work that way. Swamiji, he could see all these problems that our country was facing that time. But to progress, we have to start from wherever we are. It applies to our lives also very much. So we can only start from where we are. Then Swamiji, that's why he's stressing upon that point. It is only through the present state of things that it is possible to proceed to work. There is no other way. Everyone has the power to judge of good and evil. We cannot judge good and evil, but he is the hero who, undaunted by the waves of samsara, which is full of errors, delusions, and miseries, with one hand wipes the tears and with the other, unshaken, shows the path of deliverance. So, how a patriot, how a reformer should be. So, most of us, all of us in fact, can judge right and wrong. But the reformer, the great man, what he does? He wipes the tears with one hand and with the other hand shows the path of mukti, the deliverance, that progress. That's what he does. And he says, here in India, on the one hand, there is the conservative society, very orthodox society, like a mass of inert matter which does not shake and move. On the other, the restless, impatient, fire darting reformer. So we have two extremes, one who wants to break all the orthodoxy and the one who wants to stick to orthodoxy. And Swamiji says, the way to good lies between the two. So we cannot be highly orthodox and conservative. At the same time, we cannot be, we cannot just go about blasting everything of the past and destroying everything. So that's not going to work. We require to find the middle way. This Swami gives a beautiful example here. He says, I heard in Japan that it was the belief of the girls of that country that their dolls would be animated if they were loved with all their heart. The Japanese girl never breaks her doll. So this is a beautiful story in Japan. So the girls have dolls, and if they love their dolls very much, so they come to life. Then he says, O you of great fortune, I too believe that India will awake again. So he's comparing India to the doll which has lost life. He says, India will awake again if anyone could love with all his heart the people of the country. This is a wonderful definition of love Swamiji is giving here. So he says how the people of this country are bereft of the grace of affluence. So you don't find that grace of affluence in the Indian people, the masses, of blasted fortune, not fortunate, their discretion totally lost, downtrodden, ever starved, quarrelsome, and envious. These are the people we have. Can we love this type of people, this country? This is what Vivekananda is trying to say. So if our that doll would come to life and the Japanese girl, she loves it with all her heart. Likewise, if we can love our country, can love our country, which has so many limitations, so many drawbacks, as Swami just mentioned, even today we see it, then India will awake. Then he says beautifully, then only will India awake, when hundreds of large-hearted men and women, giving up all desires of enjoying the luxuries of life, will long and exert themselves to their utmost for the well-being of the millions of their countrymen who are gradually sinking lower and lower in the vortex of destitution and ignorance. It's almost like a prophetic call, he says. Then only will India awake. You can read it again and again. I've read it so many times and I see it in a lot of Swami Vivekananda's quotations all over India in most of the NGOs. This is a very clarion call Swamiji has given. Then only will India awake when hundreds of large-hearted men and women, giving up all desires of enjoying the luxuries of life, will long and exert themselves to their utmost for the well-being of the millions of their countrymen who are gradually sinking lower and lower in the vortex of destitution and ignorance. We need a band of hundreds of unselfish men and women who give up their personal desire to enjoy the luxuries of life that it offers, but at the same time long and exert themselves to their utmost for the sake of these millions of Indians who are sinking lower and lower every day in ignorance and being outcasted. He says, I have experienced even in my insignificant life that good motives, sincerity, and infinite love can conquer the world. So he says again, good motives, sincerity, and infinite love can conquer the world. One single soul possessed of these virtues can destroy the dark designs of millions of hypocrites and brutes. Though it may seem a bit exaggerated, uh, Swamiji himself was an illustration of this. One life which ignited the whole country, which destroyed our lot of our ignorance, which brought light into our lives. That's Swami Vivekananda's life. So he says, he of course is looking at hundreds of such people, but even then, if not hundreds, even one soul who is possessed of good motives, sincerity, and infinite love, he can conquer the world, and he can destroy the millions of the dark designs of hypocrites and brutes. So it's the type of people that we require. And Swamiji says, my going to the West again is yet uncertain. If I go, no, that too will be for India. So he had gone to the West for the first time. Now he's back in India, and he says he may go to West again. If he does, it will be for the good of India again. Then he says, where is the strength of men in this country? Where is the strength of money? Many men and women of the West are ready to do good to India by serving even the lowest Chandalas in the Indian way and through the Indian religion. How many such are here in this country? Swamiji had met some wonderful people in the West, especially Sister Nivedita has to be quoted, who had a fantastic career ahead of her in England. But she gave away all, and she came to India and served the Indians. And there are many people like her who would come and through the Indian religion serve the Indians, the lowest Chaddalas whom we do not touch. So he says, how many such people are in India? Like Sister Nivedita, for example. And he says, and financial strength to meet the expenses of my reception, the people of Calcutta made me deliver a lecture and sold tickets. This is like when Swami Vivekananda came from the West, he had a reception in Calcutta. So, of course, every program requires some money, and that was supposed to be collected, between the people and some donors. But what they did was they made Vivekananda talk, they sold the tickets, and so they procured the money. And he says, I do not blame nor censure anyone for this. I only want to show that our well-being is impossible without men and money coming from the West. So this was the idea. Swami Vivekananda wanted the interchange between the East and the West. So, of course, the initial work that Swami Vivekananda did, the construction of Belur Math, procuring the land, and he supported a couple of magazines, Brahmavadin and Udbodhan. The initial work that Swami Vivekananda's mission did, that is Ramakrishna Math mission and also his followers in South India, most of the money came from the West. Without that, I don't think we would have taken one step forward. So he believed that our well-being is impossible without men and money coming from the West. And of course, everything he said is practical. We see his own life was one of practice. It was not mere preaching and imagination. Then he concludes the letter by saying, you are grateful and you are praying to the Lord for your welfare. It's a beautiful letter to address to Srimati Sarala Ghoshal, who was the editor of a magazine called Bharati. So let us derive more and more inspiration from Swami Vivekananda's letters. And today I will conclude this. Thank you so much. Namaste.